Managed mentoring for getting started in beekeeping. This is dealing with improperly formed honeycomb. I am Kevin England. In this lesson, we'll walk through the somewhat common problem for new beekeepers of wonky comb. We'll explain what wonky means, what leads to poorly formed honeycomb. We'll review plastic foundation construction and preparation and lead you through some conditions that might cause poorly formed honeycomb. At the end of the lesson, we'll offer guidance on how to correct the problems you may encounter. What you're looking at on this slide is 24 photos shared on the Beginner Beekeeper Facebook page. In that group, every spring, this is from 2023, has beekeepers posting of the problem of wonky comb. This is only 24 photos. I know I could have collected dozens of them. One thing to note about this is very rarely are they wax. They're almost always plastic, and we're going to talk about that in this lesson. We'll take you through the reasons that this occurs, how to prevent it in the first place, and how to correct it should you encounter it somewhere along your beekeeping season. The first need of a colony that needs to build out honeycomb, wax, or plastic is to have the contingent of the population that can draw wax. This means wax-building bees. When a colony is in the state of population growth during a nectar flow, they are producing bees that will serve two key requirements. Bees that are well nourished and that are at the right age to produce wax from their wax glands. As we open the lesson, the first thing to say is this is a common experience. New beekeepers pull up a frame and they see something like what is here. In the beekeeping world, this phenomena has been termed wonky. It's just a term that has stuck in the beekeeping industry. If you're thinking about what to describe this as, it's errant comb built in an unsuitable way, especially in this style. It's formed in globs, and it might be facing the wrong way. It's not contiguous. And for this, it's simply the word that has stuck. To encapsulate the experience, it's referred to as wonky comb. In this lesson, we're going to explore what leads to wonky comb. We've touched upon some, and there are several things that can contribute to it. If we know some of the reasons it can happen, then we could do things to avoid it. Additionally, we'll give you some tips on what to do if you find it and how to correct the situation. And at the end of the lesson, we'll emphasize that it's super important to get all 10 frames built out with quality comb. This is a starter list of probable reasons that lead to errant or wonky comb. In the next few slides, we'll take a bit of time to elaborate on some of these and what you should know about it. We'll start with a little focus on plastic foundation. It has to be said that it is more common these days to see plastic foundation, and it has little to no wax coatings. It really is a big disappointment to observe this, and often it's at the core of why wonky comb is built. It puts a new beekeeper at a disadvantage too, because they don't have beeswax to correct the situation. The first thing to know is what good looks like. The edges of all the cells should have wax on top, and a well-prepared frame has every cell covered across both of the faces on either side. No gaps, no thin spots, and a reasonable enough deposit for you to visibly see it with your eyes. It might have the slight smell of wax, and it should not be smooth to the touch. If you run your finger across it, it'll have the slightest bit of drag as you detect the wax. Require a proper coating of wax. Another consideration is the quality and state of the wax laid down on the plastic foundation. Bees know wax, and they are quite fussy about it. If it's pure, clean, customary wax, you'll be off to a good start. If something's wrong with the wax, the bees will know, and they could be reticent to build upon it. Inherently, wax is quite absorbent. meaning it could take in whatever it's exposed to. From the time the frames are manufactured to the time you put them in the hive equipment, there are many opportunities for them to be exposed to something that could be absorbed in the wax. And again, bees are very sensitive to this and could detect parts per billion of foreign substances. Under the primer wax placed on the frame is a consideration. It's the plastic. The same principles apply for the plastic, that it may have some taint to it. The coating on the plastic used as a release agent in the manufacturing process. Other products that are used to wash the frames. Any of these things could be something that's an issue with the bees. Plastic foundation manufacturers, reputable ones, work all of these things out. And additionally, things can adhere to plastic in storage at a microparticle level. We may not, as humans, be able to detect the difference, but the bees can, and that might be a cause for rejection. Most beekeepers simply just buy a kit, buy the equipment, and get what comes with it. The good news is if you buy it from a beekeeping supply house, the concerns outlined in the last few slides are generally accounted for. Supply houses do not want to deal with problems from their customers. It's not good for business. If, however, you're in a different place and you're buying your frames and plastic separate from the internet, as an example, then you're going outside the normal supply chain and you might not know where the frames came from. When you buy your frames, whatever you do, wherever you get them from, put them out in the air. Let them come to at least room temperature before giving them to the bees and air out any of the odors that may be there from the manufacturing process. And while you're at it, inspect the coatings for consistency of coverage, odor, and color. If anything seems off, you may want to recondition the frames by recoating them. And there's more of that later in the lesson. Turning to other reasons beyond plastic foundation, the makeup of the colony is a key component to how bees build honeycomb. When it comes to the colony, they'll need a large population of bees, preferably during a foraging season where food is in abundance. Get the right mix and they will get the job done. In contrast, when they lack numbers, they do not have as many wax builder bees, and additionally, low numbers, the bees cannot generate enough heat to heat the area of the wax building operation. So consider that there must be a proper workforce for the bees to build honeycomb, and they need as many bees as at least what comes in a package to be viable for building honeycomb. They also require a supply of resources to enable the workforce to be able to do the job. When you're getting started and you place a colony in a box, you generally start with either a package or a nuke. Those should have sufficient number of bees to perform the task. As long as you feed them a 1-to-1 sugar solution, 1 part water to 1 part sugar by volume or weight, they should be able to carry on and build out all 10 frames. One watch item for you as a new beekeeper is the performance of the queen. As the bees start to build out the honeycomb, you want to make sure that the queen is laying at a sufficient rate to replenish the bees so that they add the workforce and gain momentum to full growth. Do take care of any queen problems and make sure that the population of the colony does not dwindle to the point where they can't suffice to build out the honeycomb. So feed your bees, but one caution is do not make them nectar bound. If you feed them so much that the queen can't lay and there's no place for her to put eggs, then you're counter to what you're trying to achieve, which is colony growth. So pay attention to the queen and pay attention that you're not overfeeding your bees. Be a fan of what good looks like. What I mean by that is that the illustration on the left side depicts what is good. And to explain what's going on here, when you have a large population of bees, they'll occupy the space between the frames. Some bees will be on one face, some bees will build on the other. As they build out the wax, they will come together in the middle, and they will maintain bee space. If you have a large contingent of bees, this is the normal operation process. They'll start to build like depicted in the illustration all the way until they finish the face, and then they'll move over to the next set of frames and begin the construction. Now, in contrast, maybe you had a population that wasn't as full, and they were on one face but not the other, and they built the wax out with no stop right into the comb next to them. You will encounter this sometimes, and there's two ways to correct it. The first one is you could take your hive tool and just kind of cut and push back. The bees will correct whatever you did to the honeycomb. The more appropriate way, in my mind, of thinking is take a comb that is built, place it against the bulging comb. The bees will chew back the errant comb and correct the bee space and solve the problem for you. Another problem to try to avoid is wonky comb on the last frames. We're talking about frame 1 and 10. That is highly likely of what the picture depicts there when you see gross amounts in wide swaths sticking out. Chances are it was against the woodenware. If you look at the illustration on the left side, you'll note that bees that have extra space will build into the gap, and they'll also attach wax to the woodenware. The way to solve this problem is to make sure that when you're building out your frames, you keep them centered in the woodenware. Boxes come with a little extra space so that you can move the frames left and right in order to create space to extract them. New beekeepers sometimes take all 10 frames, push them together, and slide them against the side, one or the other, and that leaves an open gap on the end. We'll talk about another method to prevent this problem, but one of the key things to do is, as bees are building wax, keep the frames centered in the box. Later, when they're built out and they're mature, you can slide them over to create that space if you want, or we still recommend just keep them centered in the woodenware. Coming back to fundamentals, especially when it comes to wax building bees, building wax is a bit of a formula. Now, we touched on population dynamics already, and we mentioned food, but we need to emphasize that you put all of these things together in combination. The colony must have adequate food to both build wax for the wax builders and to build bees in population, and to keep them nourished during the operation. Nectar, honey, pollen, it takes an amazing amount of resources present for bees to consume and build the energy to build wax. Another part of the formula is the heat required while operating in the space. Wax is a substance that is stiff and can hold its shape in normal temperatures. But you have to consider that the bees need it to be malleable in order to form honeycomb. That means they have to have heat until the wax is soft and pliable. To do this, the workers in that operational space where the comb is being structured keep the area at high temperatures. Now consider the cold plastic foundation, open entrances on cool days, lack of bees to produce heat. All of these provide challenges to the workforce that needs to hold temperatures at a high temperature in order to conduct the operation. One of the key things for you as a beekeeper is to keep the space compact so that they can control the environment to the temperature they require to get the job done. When you're a beekeeper for any appreciable time, you're likely going to encounter this one-off situation. A different form of wonky comb. Leave a frame out and the bees, being bees, will build comb in that space. It's what they do. To correct the situation, you're going to cut it off the frame above, off the roof or whatever, and remove that wax. Now consider where that wax got positioned. If, like the picture, it's to the outside, you could put a frame in there and they'll build that frame. But bees are more likely to be productive at building wax at the center of the nest. If I were in the situation depicted in the picture, I would pull the outer frames against the woodenware and insert the new frame down near the brood nest, where they have a lot of bees, a lot of heat, and a lot of resources, and have them do the job between two drawn combs. One additional option is you could take that sheet of wax laying there on top of the bees and hang it in a frame. Pull the plastic foundation out, or don't put wax in it, and use twine to tie it in. The bees will affix it eventually to the woodenware, and you're able to rescue the comb. Just make sure that when you put it in, you pay attention to the orientation of the cells. They should have the tilt up. That's the edge that goes to the top bar. One other tip to provide that heads off Wonky comb being built is to keep your frames tidy. We recommend you scrape off the errant comb of the top bars and the bottom bars. Clean the propolis off the shoulders and keep the frames tight together. Maintain bee space. Do not provide any opportunities for them. If you find any of the frames connected, slice the area where you extract the frame. Make sure that you could draw frames out cleanly. Errant wax that you collect can be taken away, or you might give it back to the bees in small bits by dropping it down on the bottom board. They're either going to drag it out because they don't need it, or they'll chew it up and reuse it for wax capping or other uses. The takeaway here is we recommend you keep your frames tidy and compact together. Just make sure when you're doing this operation and you have the hive open that the temperatures are conducive. Don't chill the bees while you're scraping off wax comb. Do it in those periods of the summertime when things are warm and you can keep the hive open for a little longer. Let's talk about wax foundation. It's rather rare that you build Wonky comb, but a lot of times when you find it with wax foundation, it has to do with the population dynamic. A secondary cause may be that the wax foundation you put in did not hang properly. It got knocked out of place or it was the wrong size. These problems are remedied by getting it correct or replacing it. You could just cut it out and put a new sheet in, put it back in the colony and make sure everything's tight and tidy, and the bees should build it out just fine. Here we're going to spend a little time. If you find errant Wonky comb, first thing you would do is scrape it off. Pull the frame from the colony, shake the bees off, flick them off with your brush, and you could recycle this wax to start over by collecting it, melting it down, and we'll go through that process. When you pull your honeycomb from the frame, scrape it off. It may have errant bits. It might have honey stored in it. It could have residual nectar. All things are possible. Put it in a dedicated pot, warm it gently until it melts, and then let it cool. Typically what will happen is the wax will stratify as a wax puck underneath it. Any of the dirt and debris will be stuck to the bottom of the puck, and any honey and nectar water will be at the bottom of the pan. Pull the puck out, scrape the bottom off, discard whatever liquid is there, and then you could put it back into the pot, heat it gently to warm it up, and brush or roll it onto your frames to re-wax them. Another option is to break a piece of the wax off when it cools and hardens and use it like a crayon to rub across the ribs and deposit wax in that manner. Here I'm going to take just another moment to say to you that you really want to consider dedicated equipment for this. When you melt wax in your pots and pans and you use your utensils, it is extremely difficult to clean them. We like to go to yard sales and buy used pots and pans and put them aside in the kit for this particular operation. The number one thing that we want to tell you when coating the plastic is not to flood the surface. You could use a brush or a roller, or like we said, rub it on like a crayon, but what you're looking to achieve is a buildup on the rib surfaces of the embossing. The bottoms of the cells should remain plain plastic or just the slightest coating of wax is fine. And be sure to coat every single edge of the ribs, top to bottom, side to side. Sometimes the problem with comb not being built edge to edge is because frames are not consistently coated across the entire surface of the cell ribs. Find a balance and know that more wax deposited on the ribs is not necessarily better. You're not looking to flood the face with wax, just deposit enough to get the bees started. If you take time to research instruction out on the internet, you'll see a lot of people coating their wax frames and they've just slathered the entire face, ribs, bottoms, and so on. Here we emphasize that when you see well-drawn cells, observe firsthand that there is no wax in the bottom of the cells. Bees prepping the cells, the cleaner bees, will often chew that wax out in preparation for the queen. So coating the cell floor with wax is work for the bees and something you can avoid. A quick note to say is timeliness matters. If you're doing a remediation where you're pulling frames out, you have a bit of time to work, but do not defeat the purpose. Perhaps you find some wonky comb on the outside of your frames. You can draw them out, take them in the house, remediate them efficiently, and put them back post-haste. This is for those beekeepers who do not have spare frames to put in the space while fixing the problems. The message here is a colony will build inherent space, and sometimes they can do it overnight. If you choose to do an intervention, plan it, execute it, and put those frames back in as quickly as you possibly can. So given the primer thus far, you might now have many clues to figure out what's going on. When you pull out a frame and you see wonky comb, you can assess what might be behind it. Not enough food, cold conditions, wax not coated well. Hopefully you can look at wonky comb and draw a hypothesis as to what caused it and then correct the situation. Now there's one observation we haven't talked about, and it's recycled wax. You know when you see it because the comb is not white and it's a darker color. This is a sign that you do not have wax-making bees, and it's something you see in the off-season when you're not in forage or you're not heavily building population and feeding bees. This is just something to say out loud so that when you see comb that looks this manner, it's not white, pearly white, fresh honeycomb. It could be because of those errant bits we talked about that you left below, or they're taking it from somewhere else. Another side for those who use wax foundation is you might find holes in your wax foundation on the outside ones. That means that the bees are repurposing that wax and bringing it over because they're not making wax as a colony. These are all signs of observation you could use to understand and read the problem. I'm going to take a moment here to remind from the previous lessons. It's really important to have all of the honeycomb fully built out for the bees to use. The premise of what you're looking at is that we're going to swap the outermost frames inboard. The procedure to do this requires a few steps. To execute step number 1, smoke the hive, remove the roof, pull frames 2 and 8 and set them aside. This assumes there's a feeder in the hive. In step 2, you're going to move the frames 1 and 9, the ones not built out, into the spaces where 2 and 8 previously were. To finish the job, you're going to take the frames that were drawn from 2 and 8 and you're going to put them in the outside area. This creates a place where the bees can build the unbuilt frames into frames that are built alongside of them. That wraps up this bonus lesson about wonky comb. If you have questions, you can ask at our next online session. You can also send an email to the address on the slide. If you're watching from YouTube, you can leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the next lesson.